Looking back now, I understand why they only hire people who have nowhere else to go. Desperate people don't ask questions. Desperate people follow rules, no matter how strange they seem. And desperate people are already halfway to becoming something else before they even walk through the door. I was 3 months behind on rent when I saw the job posting on a gas station bulletin board in Clarksdale, Mississippi. Night shift morgue attendant, Magnolia County Forensic Facility. No experience necessary. Must be available 11 p.m., 7 a.m. Competitive pay. Serious inquiries only. There was a phone number written in careful block letters and little tabs to tear off at the bottom. Most were still there. The facility sat 20 miles outside of town, connected to the main road by a gravel drive that wound through kudzu-strangled trees. It was a squat concrete building that looked like it had been there since the 1960s, with small windows set high in the walls and a parking lot that never seemed to have more than 3 cars in it. The kind of place you'd drive past without noticing, which I suppose was the point. I called the number from a payphone outside of Piggly Wiggly, feeding quarters with shaking hands. A woman answered on the second ring. Magnolia County Morgue. I'm calling about the night shift position. Can you start tonight? I paused, taken aback by the directness of the question. Yes, I suppose I could. Good. Be here at 10:30. Ask for Mrs. Caldwell. The line went dead. That should have been my first warning. Mrs. Caldwell was a thin woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes the color of winter sky. She wore a white lab coat over a floral dress and sensible shoes that squeaked against the linoleum as she led me through the facility. The place smelled of disinfectant and something else, something organic and sweet that made my stomach turn. The work is simple, she said as we walked. You'll be responsible for receiving bodies, basic preparation, maintaining the cold storage units, and ensuring the facility remains secure. The pay is $18 an hour, cash, every Friday. $18 an hour was more than I'd made at any job in my life. There had to be a catch. What kind of preparation? I asked. Washing, basic preservation measures, and arranging transport to the funeral homes. Nothing complicated. She stopped at a heavy metal door marked Preparation Room and turned to face me. The most important part of this job is following the rules. They exist for your safety and the safety of others. Do you understand? I nodded, though I didn't really understand anything about this place yet. She handed me a typed sheet of paper. Memorize these. Follow them exactly. No exceptions. I looked down at the list. Berry Morgue. County Morgue, night shift protections. Never work alone in the preparation room between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. If you must enter during these hours, announce yourself loudly and wait for a response before proceeding. If a body opens its eyes while you're working, stop what you're doing immediately. Place a damp cloth over the face and leave the room for exactly 7 minutes. Do not speak to or touch the body during this time. The refrigeration unit in the northeast corner, Unit 7, is not to be opened under any circumstances. If it begins making noise, call the number taped to its door and wait for instructions. When washing bodies, always work from head to toe. If you find yourself working in the opposite direction, stop immediately and begin again. This is not optional. If you hear knocking from inside any of the storage units, do not investigate. Note the time and unit number in the logbook and continue with your duties. Never eat or drink anything while on the premises between midnight and 4 a.m. Keep all food and beverages in your car. If a body sits up during preparation, do not be alarmed. Gently guide it back to the lying position and continue your work. Do not engage in conversation. The basement level is off limits to night shift personnel. If you hear sounds from below, they are not your concern. All bodies must be covered with white sheets when not being actively worked on. Blue sheets are never to be used for any purpose. I stared at the list, certain it was some kind of elaborate hazing ritual. Is this serious? Mrs. Caldwell's expression didn't change. Completely serious. How soon can you start? I thought about the eviction notice taped to my apartment door, the empty refrigerator, the car payment that was overdue. Tonight. Excellent. Eugene will train you for the first week. He's worked here for quite some time. She led me to a small office where a man sat hunched over paperwork. When he looked up, I had to suppress a start. Eugene was pale. Not just pale, but white as bone, with skin that seemed to have a faint luminescence to it. His eyes were completely black, not just the pupils, but the entire visible surface, like looking into deep water at night. He was thin to the point of gauntness, and when he smiled, his teeth seemed too sharp. "New recruit?" he asked, and his voice had a quality to it that reminded me of wind through dry leaves. "This is Marcus," Mrs. Caldwell said. "He'll be working with you on nights." Eugene stood and extended a hand. His grip was firm but cold, and his skin felt like marble. "Welcome to the team, Marcus. I think you'll find the work transformative." Mrs. Caldwell left us alone, and Eugene spent the next hour showing me around the facility. The layout was simple: a receiving area where bodies arrived, a preparation room with several metal tables and sinks, a wall of refrigeration units, and the main office. There was also a door marked basement that Eugene walked past without comment, though I noticed he gave it a wide berth. "The most important thing," Eugene said as we finished the tour, "is following the rules. They might seem strange at first, but they're there for good reason. Trust me on this." "What happens if you don't follow them?" Eugene's black eyes reflected the fluorescent lights like oil. "Let's just say the rules exist because someone learned the hard way that they were necessary. You don't want to be the one who has to learn that lesson again." My first night was quiet. 2 bodies came in: an elderly woman who died in her sleep, and a middle-aged man from a car accident. Eugene walked me through the basic procedures, checking them in, photographing them, performing initial cleaning, and storing them in the refrigeration units. It was grim work, but not complicated. The strange part was how seriously Eugene took the rules. When we finished with the first body at 12:44 a.m., he immediately packed up his coffee and sandwich and walked out to his car, returning only after 4 a.m. "Rule 6, he explained when I asked. "Never eat or drink anything on the premises between midnight and 4 a.m. "But why?" "Because the rules say so." At 2:30 a.m., I was alone in the office when I heard a sound from the preparation room. A wet, sliding noise like something being dragged across the floor. According to Rule 1, I shouldn't enter the preparation room alone between 1 and 3 a.m. I stood at the door and called out loudly, "Hello? Eugene?" No response. I waited, listening to the sound continue for several more minutes before it stopped. When Eugene returned at 4 a.m., I told him what I'd heard. "Probably just the air conditioning," he said, though his expression suggested he knew better. "Did you go in?" "No, I followed the rules." "Good, that's very good." The weeks that followed established a routine. Bodies came in irregularly, sometimes none for days, sometimes 3 or 4 in a night. I learned to work efficiently, to treat the dead with dignity, and to follow the rules without question. Eugene was a patient teacher, though he had peculiar habits. He never ate in front of me, never seemed to sweat despite the humid Mississippi heat, and sometimes I caught him staring at nothing with those black eyes, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. It was during my 3rd week that I began to notice changes in myself. It started small. I caught my reflection in the preparation room steel sink and noticed my skin looked paler than usual. I attributed it to working nights and not getting enough sun. Then I realized I wasn't getting hungry during my shifts anymore. The smell of food that had once made my mouth water now seemed cloying and unpleasant. "It's normal," Eugene said when I mentioned it. "Night shift takes some adjustment. Your body learns to adapt." By the end of my first month, I'd encountered my first rule violation. I was washing an elderly man who died of a heart attack when his eyes suddenly snapped open, staring directly at me. I jerked back, my heart pounding, but remembered Rule 2. I placed a damp cloth over his face and left the room for exactly 7 minutes, counting the seconds on the office clock. When I returned, his eyes were closed again. I removed the cloth and continued working as if nothing had happened. "Good," Eugene said when I told him. "You're learning." The second month brought more incidents. I heard knocking from Unit 4 one night, a steady, rhythmic sound that lasted for 20 minutes. I noted it in the logbook as instructed and tried to ignore it, though the sound followed me home and haunted my dreams. Another night, a young woman sat up while I was preparing her for transport. I gently guided her back down and continued my work, though she turned her head to watch me with cloudy eyes until I finished. Eugene seemed pleased with my progress. "You're taking to this better than most," he said. "Some people can't handle the reality of what we do here." "What exactly do we do here?" I asked. "I mean, really?" Eugene was quiet for a long moment. "We serve," he said finally. "We provide a necessary service to those who can no longer provide for themselves." It wasn't really an answer, but I was learning not to push for explanations that might not come. The changes in my body became more pronounced during the third month. My skin had taken on a distinctly pale, almost luminescent quality that was most noticeable under fluorescent lights. My fingernails had become harder and slightly more pointed. Most disturbing of all, my eyes were beginning to change color, the brown irises slowly being consumed by expanding black pupils. I tried to tell myself it was the stress of the job, the strange hours, the constant exposure to chemicals and death, but deep down, I knew something fundamental was happening to me. It was during this time that I had my first real encounter with the living. A woman arrived one night, around 2 a.m., frantically banging on the locked front door. Through the security glass, I could see she was middle-aged, wearing a bathrobe and slippers, her hair disheveled. "Please," she called. "My husband. They brought him here tonight. I need to see him." Eugene emerged from the preparation room, took one look at the woman and shook his head. "Don't answer it," he said. "But she's clearly in distress. Marcus," his voice was sharp, "we don't interact with the living during night shifts. That's not written in the rules, but it's policy nonetheless." "Why?" "Because the living and the dead operate on different frequencies after midnight. Crossing those lines can have consequences." The woman continued banging and pleading for another 10 minutes before finally giving up and driving away. I watched her taillights disappear down the gravel road and felt something twist in my chest. Not quite guilt, but not quite indifference either. "You'll understand eventually," Eugene said, noticing my expression. "The living have their world, and we have ours. The boundaries exist for good reason." During my 4th month, I met another employee. Her name was Sarah, and she worked the day shift in administration. She was probably in her 30s, with the same pale, luminescent skin and black eyes as Eugene, though her transformation seemed more complete. When she spoke, her voice had a quality that made it seem like it was coming from somewhere far away. "You're adapting well," she said when Eugene introduced us during a shift change. "Some people fight the process. That never ends well." "What process?" I asked. She smiled, and I noticed her teeth had the same sharp quality as Eugene's. "The becoming. We all go through it, some faster than others." "Becoming what?" "What we need to be to do this work properly." "The dead have their own requirements, Marcus. They need to be cared for by people who understand their nature." I wanted to ask more questions, but Sarah had already turned away, disappearing into the administrative wing with that strange, gliding walk I was beginning to recognize. The 5th month brought my most disturbing encounter yet. I was working alone. Eugene had called in sick, which seemed strange since I'd never seen him show any sign of illness, when Unit 7 began making noise. This was the unit I'd been specifically warned never to open, and the sounds coming from inside were unlike anything I'd heard before. Not knocking, but a wet, rhythmic pulsing like a massive heartbeat. I found the number taped to the door and called it from the office phone. A man answered immediately, as if he'd been waiting by the phone. "Unit 7?" he asked without preamble. "Yes, it's making noise." "Describe it?" I told him about the pulsing sound. He was quiet for a moment. "Do not open that unit under any circumstances. The noise will stop on its own. Continue with your regular duties." The line went dead. The pulsing continued for 3 hours, finally stopping just before dawn. When Eugene returned the next night, I told him what had happened. "Unit 7 is special," he said. "What's in there isn't quite ready for regular storage, but it's not your concern." "What do you mean, not ready?" Eugene's black eyes fixed on mine. "Some deaths are more complicated than others, Marcus. Some people don't stay dead as easily as they should. Unit 7 is where we keep them until they settle." I wanted to ask more, but Eugene's expression made it clear the conversation was over. As my 6th month began, the changes in my body accelerated. My skin had become completely pale and luminescent, particularly noticeable in darkness. My eyes were now entirely black, just like Eugene's and Sarah's. My fingernails had grown longer and harder, almost claw-like. Most strangely, I found I could see perfectly in complete darkness, as if my eyes had developed some kind of natural night vision. The living world began to feel increasingly distant. Sunlight hurt my eyes, forcing me to wear dark glasses during the day. Normal food tasted like ash in my mouth. The only thing that seemed appetizing was the protein shakes Eugene had started bringing me, though I didn't want to think too hard about what might be in them. But the most significant change was psychological. I found myself becoming emotionally detached from the living world. The concerns that had once kept me awake, bills, relationships, my uncertain future, seemed trivial and distant. The dead, on the other hand, felt increasingly real and present. I could sense their moods, their needs, their unfinished business. It was during this time that I had my second encounter with the living, and it went very differently than the first. A young man arrived at the facility around 3 a.m., claiming his girlfriend had been brought in earlier that day. Unlike the woman from months before, he was aggressive and demanding, threatening to call the police if I didn't let him see her. "Sir, I understand you're upset," I said through the security glass, "but visiting hours are during the day. You'll need to—" "I don't give a damn about visiting hours," he shouted. "She's my girlfriend. I have a right to see her." Something about his attitude triggered a response in me that I didn't recognize. A cold, predatory anger that made my vision sharpen and my hands flex involuntarily. When I spoke again, my voice had taken on that same distant quality as Sarah's. "She doesn't belong to you anymore," I said. "She belongs to us now. The dead have their own community, their own needs. You're no longer part of her world." The man stepped back, his face pale. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I stared at him through the glass with my black eyes, and I could see him gradually deflate as some primal part of his brain recognized what I had become. "Go home," I said quietly. "Forget about her. She's at peace now." He left without another word. When I told Eugene about the encounter, he smiled with genuine pleasure. "You're becoming yourself," he said. "That's wonderful progress." Is that what I am now? Myself? You're becoming what you were always meant to be, Marcus. Some people are called to serve the living. Others are called to serve the dead. You've found your calling. Month 7 brought my introduction to the community I hadn't known existed. It started when Mrs. Caldwell called me into her office during a shift change. "You've been doing excellent work," she said. "I think it's time you met some of our other facilities." She drove me to what looked like a small town about an hour away, though as we got closer I realized it wasn't quite right. The buildings were too uniform, too purposeful. The people walking the streets all had the same pale, luminescent skin and black eyes that I'd grown accustomed to seeing in mirrors. "Welcome to Haven," Mrs. Caldwell said as we parked in front of what looked like a city hall. "This is where our people live when they're not working." Our people? Those who serve the dead. It's a specialized calling, Marcus. Not everyone can do what we do, be what we are. Those who can need a place where they can exist without pretending to be something they're not. The tour of Haven was revealing. There was a small hospital staffed entirely by people like me, several funeral homes, a crematorium, and what appeared to be a small cemetery. But everything felt different here. Calmer, more purposeful. The residents moved with that same gliding walk I'd learned to recognize, and when they spoke to each other, it was in the same distant, echoing tones. "How many facilities like Magnolia County are there?" I asked. "Hundreds, all across the country. The dead are everywhere, Marcus. They need people who understand them, who can care for them properly. We provide that service." We stopped at a small cafe where several people sat at tables, though none of them seemed to be eating or drinking anything. Mrs. Caldwell introduced me to a few of them. They all had the same transformed appearance and spoke about their work with quiet pride. "I've been doing this for 12 years, said a woman named Linda who worked at a funeral home in Alabama. "Before the change, I felt lost, purposeless. Now I know exactly why I exist." "The transition can be difficult," added a man named Robert who ran a morgue in Tennessee. "But once you accept what you're becoming, everything makes sense." As we drove back to Magnolia County, Mrs. Caldwell explained more about the community. "We recruit people who are already disconnected from the living world," she said. "People who are desperate, alone, without strong ties to hold them back. The transformation is easier for those who don't have much to lose." I thought about my own situation when I'd first arrived. Broke, friendless, facing eviction. She was right. I'd had nothing to lose. "What exactly happens during the transformation?" I asked. "Your body adapts to better serve the dead. Enhanced night vision, improved sensitivity to their needs, reduced dependence on the concerns of the living. It's not magic, Marcus. It's evolution." Month 8 marked the completion of my physical transformation. My appearance had stabilized. Pale, luminescent skin, completely black eyes, sharp teeth, and claw-like fingernails. I no longer needed to eat regular food at all, sustaining myself entirely on the protein shakes Eugene provided. Sleep came in short bursts, usually during the day, and I found I could work for days without fatigue. More importantly, my connection to the dead had become complete. I could sense their presence even when they were stored in the refrigeration units. I knew when they were restless, when they needed attention, when they were ready to move on to whatever came next. The work had become intuitive rather than procedural. It was during this time that I had my third encounter with the living, and it crystallized everything I'd been becoming. A police officer arrived one night, investigating a missing persons report. A family had been asking about their son, who had been brought to our facility after a motorcycle accident. "I need to verify that the body is here," the officer said, showing me his badge through the security glass. "Visiting hours are during the day," I replied automatically. "This is official police business. I need to see the body now." Something about his tone irritated me. The living world and its procedures seemed increasingly irrelevant and intrusive. The dead had their own requirements, their own schedule, their own dignity that shouldn't be disrupted by the demands of people who didn't understand. "Officer," I said, my voice taking on that distant quality, "the dead are not subject to your jurisdiction. They have their own community, their own needs. That young man is at peace now. He doesn't need to be disturbed by the concerns of the living." The officer stared at me through the glass, his hand instinctively moving to his weapon. "What kind of place is this?" "A sanctuary," I said simply, "for those who serve the dead and those who need their service." The officer left, though he returned the next day with several colleagues and a warrant. By then, the day shift had taken over, and Sarah handled the situation with the proper paperwork and professional demeanor that satisfied their legal requirements. But I knew that I'd crossed a line, had stopped pretending to be part of the living world. Eugene was proud of my progress. "You're ready for the next step," he said. "What next step?" "Mrs. Caldwell wants to see you." The meeting took place in Mrs. Caldwell's office at the end of my 8th month. She sat behind her desk with several folders spread out in front of her, each containing what looked like employment documents. "Marcus, you've exceeded all expectations," she said. "Your transformation has been complete and your dedication to the work is exemplary. It's time to discuss your future." "My future?" "We're opening a new facility in Arkansas. Rural area, very isolated, perfect for our kind of work. We need someone to run it, someone who understands both the technical aspects of the job and the deeper purpose of what we do." She slid a contract across the desk. The salary was more than I'd ever imagined earning, with benefits and housing provided. The job description was essentially the same as what I'd been doing, but with managerial responsibilities and complete autonomy. "This is an incredible opportunity," I said, scanning the document. "It's not an opportunity, Marcus. It's your purpose. This is what you were always meant to do. Some people spend their entire lives searching for their calling. You've found yours." I looked up from the contract. "What if I said no?" Mrs. Caldwell's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. "People like us don't say no to our purpose, Marcus. We can't. It's not in our nature anymore." She was right, of course. The idea of returning to the living world, of trying to pretend I was still human, seemed not just impossible but actively repulsive. I belonged with the dead now. I understood them, could care for them properly, could provide the service they needed. "When do I start?" I asked, signing the contract. "Next month. Eugene will help you transition your current duties. Congratulations, Marcus. You've found your home." My final month at Magnolia County was spent training my replacement, a young woman named Amy, who arrived with the same desperate look I remembered from my own first day. She was pale and thin, with dark circles under her eyes, and the obvious signs of someone who'd run out of options. "The most important thing," I told her as we went through the rules together, "is following the procedures exactly. They exist for good reason." She nodded, though I could see the skepticism in her eyes, the same skepticism I'd felt 9 months earlier. "What happens if you don't follow them?" she asked. I smiled, noting how sharp my teeth had become. "Let's just say the rules exist because someone learned the hard way that they were necessary. You don't want to be the one who has to learn that lesson." It was the same thing Eugene had told me on my first day. On my final night, Eugene gave me a farewell gift, a bottle of the protein shakes I'd become dependent on. "For the road," he said. "The new facility won't have these ready for a few weeks." "What's actually in them?" I asked. Eugene's black eyes met mine. "Does it matter? They sustain us. They help us serve our purpose. That's all we need to know." He was right. Some questions didn't need answers. Mrs. Caldwell drove me to Arkansas herself, a 6-hour journey through back roads and small towns that seemed to get smaller and more isolated as we went. The new facility was even more remote than Magnolia County, a single building at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by pine forests and swampland. "You'll have 2 assistants arriving next week," she said as she handed me the keys. "Both fully transformed, both experienced. The local authorities have been prepared for your arrival. They understand the nature of your work and won't interfere." The building was newer than those in Magnolia County, but it followed the same basic layout: receiving area, preparation room, refrigeration units, and office space. There was also a small apartment on the 2nd floor where I would live. "One more thing," Mrs. Caldwell said as she prepared to leave. "Unit 12 in the back corner. Same rules as Unit 7 at Magnolia County. Never open it. Call the number if it makes noise. It's in there. Something that's been waiting for the right caretaker. I think you'll understand when the time comes." After she left, I spent the evening exploring my new home. The apartment was simple but comfortable, with blackout curtains and a small kitchen I knew I'd rarely use. The real attraction was the preparation room below. Larger than the one at Magnolia County, with state-of-the-art equipment and a wall of refrigeration units that hummed quietly in the darkness. My first client arrived that night, an elderly farmer who died in his sleep. As I went through the familiar procedures of receiving, photographing, and preparing him, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what I was meant to do. This was my purpose. Over the following weeks, more clients arrived. The assistants Mrs. Caldwell had promised showed up. A man named David and a woman named Janet, both with the familiar pale skin and black eyes of our kind. They worked efficiently and without complaint, understanding the deeper purpose of what we did. The living world gradually faded from my awareness. I stopped thinking about my old life, my old worries, my old identity. Marcus, the desperate human, had died somewhere in that morgue in Mississippi, and something new had taken his place, something that understood the dead, that could care for them properly, that could provide them with the dignity and service they deserved. Sometimes, late at night when the facility was quiet, I would walk through the refrigeration area and simply listen. The dead had their own language, their own community, their own needs. Most people couldn't hear them, couldn't understand what they required, but we could. We were the bridge between the world of the living and the world of the dead, and it was a sacred responsibility. I had my fourth encounter with the living about a month after arriving in Arkansas. A young woman came to the facility looking for her grandfather, who'd been brought in the previous week. She was crying, desperate, clearly in the early stages of grief. "I just need to see him," she pleaded through the security glass. "Just for a moment, please." 2 years ago, when I was still human, I would have felt sympathy for her. I would have wanted to help, to provide comfort in her time of loss. But now I saw the situation differently. The dead had their own requirements, their own schedule, their own peace that shouldn't be disturbed by the emotional needs of the living. "He's not yours anymore," I told her gently. "He belongs to us now. We'll take care of him. He's at peace." She stared at me with a mixture of fear and revulsion, backing away from the glass. "You're not human," she whispered. "No," I agreed. "I'm something better, something that can properly care for those who can no longer care for themselves." She fled, and I returned to my work with a sense of satisfaction. The boundaries between the living and the dead existed for good reason. It was my job to maintain those boundaries. The transformation was complete now, both physical and psychological. I existed to serve the dead, and they existed to give my life meaning. It was a perfect symbiosis, a purpose that filled every moment of my existence with significance. Late at night, when the facility was quiet and the dead were resting peacefully in their units, I would sometimes think about the person I used to be. Marcus the human, desperate and alone, stumbling through life without direction or purpose. That person seemed like a stranger now, someone I'd known briefly but never really understood. I was grateful for the transformation, grateful to Mrs. Caldwell for seeing my potential, to Eugene for guiding me through the process, to the entire community that had welcomed me and helped me find my true nature. Some people spent their entire lives searching for meaning, for purpose, for a place where they truly belonged. I had found all of that in a morgue in Mississippi, and I had never been happier. The dead were calling, and I was ready to answer. It was what I was born to do, even if I'd needed to die a little first to understand that truth. 6 months into my tenure at the Arkansas facility, Unit 12 began making noise for the first time. Not the wet pulsing I'd heard from Unit 7, but something else. A soft scratching sound, like fingernails against metal, accompanied by what sounded almost like whispered conversation. I called the number Mrs. Caldwell had given me, and she answered immediately. "Unit 12?" she asked. "Yes." Scratching sounds, and what might be voices. There was a long pause. "Marcus, Unit 12 contains something very special. Something that's been waiting for the right caretaker. I think it's time you met your predecessor." "My predecessor?" "The person who ran this facility before you. He underwent a different kind of transformation, one that's reserved for those who show exceptional dedication to the work. Would you like to meet him?" I found myself saying yes before I'd fully processed the question. "Open Unit 12, Mrs. Caldwell said, but be prepared. He's been waiting a long time for someone who could understand." My hands trembled slightly as I approached Unit 12. The scratching sounds grew louder as I got closer, and I could definitely hear whispered words now, though I couldn't make them out clearly. I turned the handle and pulled the door open. Inside, sitting upright on the metal shelf, was a man who might have once looked like me. Pale, luminescent skin, completely black eyes, sharp teeth. But the transformation had gone further. His skin had taken on an almost translucent quality, and I could see dark veins beneath it that pulsed with their own rhythm. His fingernails had grown into true claws, and when he smiled at me, I saw that his mouth was full of needle-sharp teeth. "Hello, Marcus," he said, and his voice was like wind through a cemetery. "I've been waiting to meet you." "You're the previous caretaker?" "I was, until I became something more. My name is Thomas, though names don't matter much anymore. What matters is the work. What matters is service. What matters is understanding that the transformation doesn't end with what you've experienced so far." He climbed down from the unit with movements that were fluid and inhuman. "You've learned to serve the dead, Marcus. But there's more to learn. There's the community of the transformed, those of us who have given ourselves completely to the work. Would you like to join us?" I looked at Thomas, at what he had become, and felt a strange mixture of fear and fascination. What would that mean? It means letting go of the last vestiges of what you were. It means accepting that your purpose is not just to serve the dead, but to become something that exists between life and death. It means joining a community that spans the entire country, all of us connected, all of us working toward the same goal. What goal? Thomas smiled with his mouth full of sharp teeth. "Taking care of everyone, Marcus, the living and the dead. Making sure that when people die, they have someone who understands them, waiting to help them transition. Making sure that when people are desperate and alone, like you were, they have somewhere to go, someone to become." I thought about Amy, the young woman who'd replaced me at Magnolia County, about all the other desperate people who would find their way to facilities like ours, who would undergo the same transformation I had, who would find their purpose in serving the dead. "We're recruiters," I said, understanding finally. "We're saviors," Thomas corrected. "We find people who are lost and help them find their way. We take people who have nothing and give them everything. We transform the desperate into the essential." He was right. Looking back on my transformation, I could see how carefully it had been orchestrated. The job posting placed where someone like me would find it, the rules designed to gradually acclimate me to the impossible, the slow physical changes that I'd rationalized until they were complete, the community that had welcomed me once I was ready. "It's beautiful," I said, and I meant it. "Yes," Thomas agreed. "And you're ready to help us expand it, to find more people like you were, to guide them through their own transformations, to build a network that can care for everyone who needs our services." That night, after Thomas had returned to Unit 12 to rest, I sat in my office and thought about the future, about all the desperate people out there who didn't know they were meant for something greater, about all the morgues and funeral homes and crematoriums that could be transformed into sanctuaries for those who served the dead. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for a local newspaper. When they answered, I placed an advertisement in the classified section. "Night shift morgue attendant, rural Arkansas forensic facility, no experience necessary, must be available 11 p.m., 7 a.m. Competitive pay, serious inquiries only." I gave them my phone number and hung up, then sat back in my chair with a deep sense of satisfaction. Somewhere out there was another desperate person, another lost soul who didn't know they were meant for something greater. Soon, they would see my advertisement. Soon they would call. Soon they would begin their own transformation. The cycle would continue, as it had continued for decades, as it would continue for decades more. We were building something beautiful, something necessary, something that served both the living and the dead in ways they couldn't understand. I walked through the facility one more time before dawn, checking on the bodies in their units, ensuring everything was secure and peaceful. In Unit 12, I could hear Thomas moving around, preparing for whatever came next in his own evolution. In the other units, the dead rested quietly, cared for by someone who truly understood their needs. My reflection in the stainless steel surfaces showed a creature that was no longer human, but something better, something purposeful, something that belonged. The phone rang as I was finishing my rounds. I answered it immediately. Arkansas Forensic Facility. I'm calling about the night shift position. The voice was young, female, desperate. Can you start tonight? Yes, I think so. Good. Be here at 10:30. Ask for Marcus. I hung up and smiled with my mouth full of sharp teeth. The transformation would begin again, as it always did, as it always would. Another lost soul would find their purpose. Another servant would join our community. Another guardian would take their place among those who cared for the dead. Looking back now, I understand that my story isn't unique. Across the country, in small towns and rural areas, in places where desperate people wash up like driftwood on a beach, there are facilities like ours. Places where the hopeless can find hope, where the purposeless can find meaning, where the alone can find community. We are the bridge between worlds, the caretakers of those who can no longer care for themselves, the guardians of the boundary between life and death. We are what we were always meant to be, even when we were still human enough to think we were something else. The dead are calling, and we are here to answer. It's what we do. It's what we are. It's what we will always be. And tomorrow night, someone new will walk through our doors, desperate and alone, ready to begin their own transformation, ready to find their purpose, ready to come home. The cycle continues, and I couldn't be more grateful to be part of it. In the distance, I can hear Unit 12 opening again. Thomas is emerging for another night of work, another night of service, another night of becoming something even more than what he already is. Soon, I think, I'll be ready for that next transformation myself, ready to let go of the last vestiges of what I was and become something truly eternal. But for now, I have work to do, bodies to care for, rules to follow, a new recruit to train. The dead are patient, but they're also demanding. They deserve the best care we can provide, and we are uniquely qualified to give it to them. After all, we understand death in ways the living never could. We've died ourselves in all the ways that matter and been reborn as something better, something necessary, something that serves. The phone will ring again soon, and I'll be ready to answer it. Another desperate soul will find their way to us, and we'll guide them through their own transformation, just as we were guided through ours. It's a beautiful system, really, perfect in its simplicity, elegant in its execution. The desperate become the dedicated, the lost become the found, the dying become the eternal. And in the end, everyone gets exactly what they need, even if they don't know they need it when they first walk through our doors. The dead are calling, and we are here to answer, forever and always.